All right, welcome back, guys. So yeah, I've got Elliot here, and we're going to be going over in this video my personal tax situation. We're going to be going into a decent amount of depth, just going over everything that I'm personally doing. And I think we're also going to cover banking side of things, like what exchanges I use, what banks I use, a little bit of depth on that side, as far as I'm aware. So just for context, I've been in Australia and I'm an Australian tax resident. I fly out of Australia in a couple of days to go to the US. And that flight out of Australia, I will be registering as my leaving Australia as a tax resident flight. And then I'll be looking to get set up with my banking in Miami and moving around the world for, I guess, a couple of years without a tax residence. And that's how I will not be paying any taxes, personal taxes, capital gains, or I guess company taxation. So no tax whatsoever. And that also gets me access to the US banking infrastructure because I'm going over to Miami. I'm going to open some bank accounts there, which is really important for if you're trying to move money from crypto into the real fiat world. If you're dealing with millions of dollars, you need to have access to proper banking infrastructure. So I'll let Elliot, the professional, actually take it into more depth because I only know what he's told me. So yeah, thanks Elliot for coming on the call, and I'll let you take over.
For sure. Well, hey everyone, glad to be here going through this. If you haven't seen a bunch of the other videos in the course, probably good to watch those first because there's a big overview given in terms of how we approach tax, how you should think about going around paying no tax in crypto. And there's some general concepts around how international tax works and how tax residency works that's pretty key for going through and paying no tax in crypto, as Daniel is going to do. So what I'll do is I'll share my screen. I've got a little presentation to go through, and we'll walk through kind of the different sections of his setups. And as Daniel said, go into a decent amount of detail. As I say, in this video, we're going to go through his personal setup. None of this should be constituted tax advice. We are just showing what we've done with Daniel. Your situation is likely different. I don't recommend just blindly copying someone else's strategy, even if you think it's the same. There's a lot of tax nuance that you might not be able to grasp. Okay, that being said, so the background going into this, as he said, Daniel's an Australian citizen. He's been living in Australia mostly full time. And so he is an Australian tax resident. And he came to me and his goals were to have a solid crypto onboarding and offboarding solution to allow him to convert back to fiat at the end of the next bull run, both across business and personal, because he receives crypto in his business while investing in it personally, and to reduce his taxes to zero or as low as possible. So with that being said, the first step was to think about leaving Australia. So in order to pay no taxes, he has to leave Australia as a tax resident because Australia tax you on your worldwide income and worldwide gains. So this is the first step for most people of paying low to no taxes, is leaving their country of residence. So there are a number of tests in order to leave Australia, and you need to cut ties, minimize the amount of time you spend in Australia. And a key one is to move your permanent home overseas. So cutting ties means like closing up personal bank accounts, not having an apartment, not having a gym membership, not having a car, minimizing the amount of time spent in Australia. As you will have seen in other videos, there's an element of judgment call. There's not a hard X days equals no tax resident, Y days equals tax resident. We'll try to keep those as low as possible. But as a general rule, you shouldn't really be looking at spending more than 3 months in your home country once you're trying to leave as a tax resident. And as we say, moving the permanent home overseas, this is really key because unlike other countries, say the UK, where it's more solely on days basis, a big part of Australia is saying that I've left with the intention to reside elsewhere for more than a temporary basis, on a permanent basis, and I've got a new home elsewhere. So that was sort of the things coming up into leaving Australia. Something as well is that Australia has an exit tax. So it'll tax you on the value of your assets, shares, property, crypto, things like that at the point when you leave. And so we've had to do some careful tax planning to ensure that that's minimized for Daniel. So for those of you who are thinking, I'll just wait till the end of the bull run, then I'll leave my country of tax residence. If your country has an exit tax, you might just end up fucking yourself and taxing your crypto at the peak. And then there's no guarantee that you'll actually sell. And so that'd just be a terrible strategy. If you have a exit tax, if you're a tax resident of a country with an exit tax, you need to be doing this early. Okay, so one of the places Daniel wanted to spend some time was Bali. Now, Bali isn't really a favorable tax jurisdiction. You may have heard of a bunch of people moving there. They're not paying taxes because the Indonesian government isn't really catching on and isn't really investigating them. But, if you spend more than 6 months in Bali as a non-resident, you're going to be a tax resident there, and they have relatively high personal and corporate taxes. So it's key that Daniel doesn't get tax residency in Bali. So we're going to ensure that he spends less than 6 months there. However, what we are are going to do is that's where he wants his new permanent home to be. That's where he wants to live and move to. So we're going to, as part of leaving Australia, that's where we're going to declare that his permanent home is. So in order to do that, you can't really have your permanent home somewhere if you're just on a tourist visa. That's a pretty loose argument. So Dan went and got an investor's KITAS visa, which gives him the legal right to reside in Bali. That's a core part of it. That allows Daniel to spend, time in Bali each year without having to do visa runs or anything. He can spend as much time as he wants, but he'll spend less than 6 months to ensure that he doesn't get tax residency. Another place Daniel wanted to spend some time was Portugal. So given that we've got him a visa and residency in Bali, then he was only looking at spending maybe 3, 4, 5 months in Portugal. You can do 90 days very easily on a visitor's visa on arrival. Didn't feel that getting a residency permit was necessary, and therefore tax residency isn't really a concern anyway, because he's going to be spending 3 to 5 months. Just as a note, in the other videos I mentioned that it is possible to get tax residency somewhere by spending less than 6 months there. Particularly Portugal, that was one of the examples I gave. If you have your permanent residence there, in the Portuguese tax code, they can call you a tax resident. But as Daniel's going to be spending time in Airbnbs, that's not really a concern. Something else we've done is we've set up a company in Dubai. Now, this isn't actually where most of the business transactions happen. We'll get onto that in the next slide. But one of the key reasons we've done that is to get a personal residency permit. What that allows Daniel to do is he can spend as much time in Dubai, and that allows Dan to get a tax residency by spending 90 days in the UAE per year. That's not a mandatory requirement. He only needs to spend 1 day every 6 months to maintain the visa in the company, but it allows him to get a tax residency there if he wants to. It also allows him to get personal bank accounts in Bali. So as he mentioned, he's going to be going to the US to set up bank accounts there, but having multiple offboarding and onboarding routes was pretty important. So this spreads his personal accounts between, the UAE and the Middle East and the US to sort of diversify his wealth a bit. So it also means that we can open multiple bank accounts and connect them to multiple crypto exchanges like Binance, BitOasis, and eToro in the UAE. Now, the business itself is run through a US LLC. So I covered this in one of the examples. This is one of these pass-through entities. This offers excellent banking and payments infrastructure in a secure country with a good reputation. You don't need to physically visit to set up the business or the banking, and there's no tax payable in the US on the basis that there's no US operations. And what this also meant we could do was set up Kraken and Coinbase accounts for additional on-off ramps. Now, as I mentioned in some of the course content, it doesn't always make sense for everyone to open a business account and invest via their business. But because Daniel is receiving crypto in his business, that's part of the infrastructure that we need, and it makes sense in this case. But he's not really going to be investing in crypto through the business. He's just going to be receiving funds and then paying himself out personally. But it means that, we can use that US banking versus the Dubai banking. It's a little more easier to use, and you can get good foreign exchange rates and things like that as well. That's what a lot of people will use if they set up in Dubai. A lot of them will have a US LLC as part of that structure to receive payments. Okay, looking at those crypto on-off ramps. So across the entire sort of setup, we've got 4 different business bank accounts in the US, 3 different exchange accounts across 2 different entities. So 1 for business and 1 for personal investments. The reason we've done that, as I've banged on about in the course, is that having backup options is really key. If one of those exchanges like Kraken has to shut up shop in the US for whatever reason, we've still got access to Coinbase, etc. And same with the bank accounts. If one of them changes their tune, we've got others. So we're diversifying the risk of some unknown, some black swan event happening there. And as I mentioned, we've also got that Dubai residency, which allows him to have his personal bank accounts in Dubai and connect to crypto exchanges such as Binance, BitOasis, and eToro. And as Daniel mentioned, in addition to those personal accounts in Dubai, Dan is going to go and set up personal bank accounts in the US so that he has access to that US banking system as well. But that's more just going to be for paying out to fiat at the end of the bull run versus investing in crypto personally. That will be done through Dubai and then through the US business stuff. So that's an overview of the setup. I guess just to recap, the key things we were looking at was, what are your goals starting out? What are you trying to optimize for? Is it tax residency? Is it crypto on-off boarding? They don't always go together. Identifying what country he was a tax resident of, Australia, identifying if there was an exit tax and doing some planning ahead of that. And then really identifying the combination of setups needed. So where does he actually want to spend time? Do we need visas or permits there? How are we leaving Australia as a tax resident? Where's his new permanent residency going to be? And then what all the things we might need to include in the business. I hope that was useful. We've definitely set up a number of things for you. Not all of them are necessarily, but given the importance of having having backup options and multiple crypto on-off ramps, it's perhaps a bit more detailed than some of you might expect. And so I think that's a key thing to drive home, is that it is possible to get down to 0% tax, but that doesn't come without compromise. Daniel has to spend, most of the year outside of Australia now, and there's a decent amount of admin and time and cost involved in getting all of this stuff set up.
Yeah, that's good. That's a pretty good summary.